The number one thing people lose in a prolonged power outage is not water. It is not communication. It is food. Specifically, it is the hundreds of dollars worth of meat, dairy, and frozen goods sitting in their refrigerator and freezer right now. Emergency management agencies estimate the average American household has about $400 worth of perishable food at any given time. When the power goes out for more than a day or two, almost all of that perfectly good sustenance ends up rotting in the trash. Here is what is profoundly interesting about this recurring domestic tragedy, however. The technology to prevent that massive financial and nutritional loss is entirely simple, remarkably affordable, and available right now at your local hardware store. We are not talking about installing a $10,000 whole home backup generator. We are not talking about a massive roof-spanning solar array that requires professional installation and permits. We are talking about a fundamental, basic setup that costs under $300, fits comfortably in a small apartment closet, and can keep your family's food remarkably cold and safely preserved for weeks or even months during an extended electrical grid failure. The core of this straightforward solution is something most people completely overlook. It is not overlooked because it is hidden, overly complex, or prohibitively expensive, but because modern society has been deeply conditioned to think about power outages in exactly the wrong way. When the lights go dark, we immediately think about heavy-duty generators. We obsess over when the power company will turn the grid back on. We almost never think about the subtle, ticking clock of what is happening to our food during that uncertain gap of time. By the time we finally do open the refrigerator door to check, it is often far too late, and the warm air has already ruined our supply. Therefore, we must fundamentally reframe the entire problem, starting with a foundational question that completely changes how you approach household emergency preparedness. How much electricity does it actually take to keep food frozen? Because the vast majority of people wildly overestimate the answer to this question. That severe overestimation leads them to either spend way too much money on oversized backup power systems or just give up entirely, assuming they cannot do anything meaningful on a tight budget. To understand the solution, we must look at the problem with standard kitchen appliances. A standard upright kitchen freezer, the kind most of us have built right into our primary refrigerator, uses somewhere around 400 to 600 watts of power when the internal compressor is actively running. It cycles on and off repeatedly throughout the day and ends up consuming roughly 1.5 to 2 kilowatt-hours of electrical energy over a standard 24-hour period. That is a substantial amount of energy, more than enough that trying to run it from a small portable power station or a modest backup solar setup becomes incredibly expensive and mathematically unfeasible very quickly. However, a dedicated standalone chest freezer changes these dynamics entirely. A modest 5 cubic foot chest freezer, which is surprisingly spacious and big enough to hold roughly 175 pounds of food, uses only about 60 to 80 watts of electricity when its compressor kicks on. Because of how chest freezers are physically designed with the opening on the top, the cold air does not constantly fall out and escape every time you open the lid, which means they need to cycle far less frequently. Total daily energy consumption for one of these units is often well under 1 kilowatt-hour. Some of the newer, more highly efficient models even come in around 0.7 kilowatt-hours per day. That is a massive, game-changing difference in energy requirements, and it is the absolute foundation of everything we are going to build upon for emergency food security. The reason chest freezers are so much more incredibly efficient comes down to basic, unavoidable physics. Cold air is physically denser than warm air, so it naturally sinks to the lowest possible point. When you swing open the vertical door of an upright kitchen freezer, that heavy, cold air literally pours out onto your kitchen floor and immediately gets replaced by the warm, ambient air of the room. The appliance's compressor then has to forcefully turn on and work overtime, consuming massive amounts of energy to cool all of that new warm air back down to freezing temperatures. A chest freezer completely avoids this thermodynamic nightmare. When you open the lid of a chest freezer, the dense cold air just stays comfortably sitting in the bottom of the unit, exactly like water resting calmly in a bathtub. You reach in, grab the item you need, close the top lid, and the compressor barely even registers that a temperature change occurred. This single brilliant difference in mechanical design is the exact reason why a very modest backup power system can easily keep a chest freezer running almost indefinitely, while that exact same battery system would completely drain and exhaust itself, trying to keep a standard upright freezer cold for even 2 days. Therefore, establishing this setup requires acquiring the right hardware, and it is important to walk through each specific piece, explain exactly why it matters, and detail what it actually costs in the real world. The very first piece of the puzzle is the chest freezer itself. A brand new 5 cubic foot chest freezer generally runs between $140 to $180, depending on the specific brand name and the retail store where you choose to purchase it. Several major appliance manufacturers make incredibly solid, reliable models right in this exact price range. This specific 5 cubic foot size is highly ideal, because it is large enough to hold a truly meaningful, life-sustaining amount of food for a family, but it remains physically small enough to easily fit tucked away in an apartment closet, tucked into a garage corner, or even placed quietly in a large walk-in pantry. Furthermore, if you are willing to check local second-hand online marketplaces, you can very frequently find a gently used one for anywhere from $60 to $100, bringing the initial investment down even further. The second crucial piece of this system is the concept of thermal mass. This is where the strategy shifts from basic appliance management to genuinely clever emergency engineering. A chest freezer that is only half full actually has to work much harder to maintain its temperature than a freezer that is packed completely full, because all of that empty, uninsulated airspace inside warms up very quickly. However, you absolutely do not need to fill the entire cavity exclusively with expensive cuts of meat and frozen vegetables. Instead, you strategically fill all the empty gaps and voids with frozen water bottles or frozen gallon jugs. Regular everyday tap water poured into standard plastic containers works perfectly. Empty milk jugs work remarkably well. 2-liter soda bottles work incredibly well. Even heavy-duty plastic storage bags filled with water and laid entirely flat to freeze will do the exact same job. Incorporating this water does 2 distinct and vital things for your system. First, it makes the freezer drastically more efficient during completely normal, everyday operation, because the massive blocks of frozen water act as a giant thermal battery. The electrical compressor runs far less frequently, because the dense mass of solid ice holds the freezing temperature much more effectively and consistently than empty air ever could. You will actually notice a measurable decrease in your monthly electricity bill just by doing this. A chest freezer tightly packed with frozen water jugs predictably uses measurably less energy than that exact same freezer sitting half empty. Second, and this is the absolutely critical part for emergency preparedness, when the power ultimately goes out, all of that built-up thermal mass dramatically and reliably extends exactly how long your precious food stays safely frozen. A full chest freezer tightly packed with a combination of dense food and solid frozen water can easily stay at safe freezing temperatures for 48 to 72 hours, with absolutely zero power coming into the unit. Many people living in cooler climates report even longer safe periods, depending heavily on the ambient temperature of the room and exactly how well insulated the specific freezer model happens to be. There is a very practical, scientific way to think about this phenomenon. 1 single gallon of frozen water naturally absorbs about 1,200 British thermal units of heat energy from the surrounding environment, simply as it undergoes the physical process of melting. Placing 6 or 8 frozen gallon jugs deep inside your chest freezer represents a truly massive, formidable wall of cold that the ambient room heat has to completely overcome before your actual food is in any real danger of thawing. It is the exact same brilliant thermodynamic principle behind the old-fashioned ice houses used in the 19th century. It is just being applied practically in a modern, highly efficient, insulated container. Furthermore, here is a vital, low-tech detail that most people completely miss when planning their grid-down strategies. You can easily boost that safe time window significantly by doing one incredibly simple, practically free thing. Simply throw a couple of heavy winter blankets or a thick insulated camping sleeping bag directly over the top lid of the chest freezer the moment the power grid goes down. The top lid is universally the least insulated part of any chest freezer design. Adding that thick, extra layer of makeshift insulation right on top can easily extend your safe, freezing temperature window by another 12 to 24 hours. So now, just by utilizing water jugs and a spare blanket, you are potentially looking at 3 to 4 full days of perfectly safe food storage with zero electricity required whatsoever. And that impressive timeline is achieved before we even plug a single backup battery into the wall. However, we are not simply stopping at 3 or 4 days, because 3 to 4 days is certainly not the same as weeks or months of true independence. For that extended level of deep security, we need the third major piece of the equation, a portable power station directly paired with a very small, manageable solar panel. This exact point in the planning process is where most people mistakenly assume the financial cost is going to spiral completely out of control. But you must constantly remember the core premise. We are not attempting to power an entire modern kitchen. We are not trying to run a power-hungry microwave, an electric oven, or a massive central air conditioner. We are exclusively powering a single, highly efficient chest freezer that deliberately draws well under 1 kilowatt-hour of energy per single day. That specific, low power requirement changes the mathematical equation completely in your favor. A reliable 200 watt-hour portable lithium battery power station generally costs somewhere between $150 to $200. These highly portable units typically weigh only around 7 or 8 pounds, are roughly the physical size of a child's lunchbox, and can rapidly and fully recharge themselves directly from a standard wall outlet in just a few short hours when the grid is up. Most importantly, they have standard household alternating current outlets built right into the front of them, so when an outage occurs, you literally just unplug your chest freezer's cord from your dead living room wall and securely plug it directly into the battery of the power station. There is absolutely no complicated wiring required, no expensive home installation, and no need to hire a professional electrician. On a full 100% charge, a typical 200 watt-hour battery station can smoothly run a modern chest freezer for roughly 4 to 5 hours of continuous active compressor time. Because we know the compressor naturally cycles on and off rather than running constantly, those 4 to 5 hours of battery life safely translates to about 8 to 12 hours of real-world, functional operation. The compressor does not need to run continuously. It simply kicks on, quietly cools the internal compartment down to the chosen target temperature, and then shuts completely off again. It might only need to actively run for 15 to 20 minutes out of every single hour to maintain the deep freeze. That brief, intermittent cycling behavior is exactly what makes the entire backup system highly viable and deeply successful, with a relatively small, inexpensive battery. Now, admittedly, by itself, that small battery is not quite enough for completely indefinite, endless operation. But the moment you pair that portable battery with a small, lightweight solar panel, even a basic 50 to 100 watt folding panel, the entire longevity equation shifts completely in your favor. A standard 100 watt solar panel sitting out in relatively average weather conditions will reliably generate roughly 400 to 600 watt-hours of electrical energy over the course of a single day. Your chest freezer realistically only needs maybe 700 to 1,000 watt-hours per day to function perfectly. So, a single, affordable 100 watt panel easily gets you most of the way there, and the fully charged power station effortlessly covers the minor remaining gap during cloudy stretches of weather and throughout the dark overnight hours. If you decide to slightly upgrade and bump your solar collection up to a 200 watt panel, which is still a highly manageable folding unit that easily slides into a hallway closet, when perfectly stored, you are suddenly generating far more than enough raw power to keep the freezer completely happy and continuously top off the power station battery to maximum capacity at the exact same time. That powerful combination gives you a genuine, reliable surplus of electricity, which is a profoundly comfortable and secure position to be in during a chaotic emergency. One critically important thing worth knowing about solar panels is that they absolutely do not need direct, blinding, blazing sunlight to produce usable electrical power. They certainly produce less energy on dark, overcast, cloudy days, perhaps only yielding 30 to 50% of their maximum rated output. But they still actively produce power. A 200 watt panel sitting outside on a gloomy, cloudy afternoon might still easily give you 80 to 100 watts of effective, continuous charging power. That amount is still more than enough to meaningfully and steadily charge your portable power station and keep the entire preservation system running smoothly. There is also one highly practical tip to remember when purchasing your equipment. If you are buying a portable power station specifically and exclusively for this freezer purpose, you must look very closely at the peak surge wattage rating on the box, not just the continuous running wattage rating. Chest freezer compressors, by their mechanical nature, draw a very brief, intense spike of electrical power at the exact second they kick on to start cooling. This sudden spike is usually 2 to 3 times their standard running wattage, but it generally lasts for just a tiny fraction of a single second. Most high-quality portable power stations in the 200-plus watt-hour range handle this brief surge completely fine without tripping their internal breakers, but it is always highly worth checking the manufacturer's specifications just to make absolutely sure. If we carefully tally up the total financial cost of this comprehensive system, the numbers are extremely encouraging. A brand new chest freezer is about $150. The empty water jugs needed for the vital thermal mass are essentially completely free. A small, reliable, portable lithium power station runs around $150. That brings us to $300, right at our exact intended target budget. We have achieved this incredible level of security, and we have not even added the solar panel into the mix yet. The solar panel is really the only additional piece that gently pushes the project slightly beyond the absolute base budget. Usually, a good panel will cost another $80 to $150, depending entirely on the specific wattage you choose. But even without the solar panel, you still have a highly robust system that can easily keep your family's food frozen solid for many consecutive days, relying strictly on the passive thermal mass and the fully charged power station alone. Furthermore, you can easily recharge that power station directly from your personal vehicle, if you desperately need to. The total, realistic, practical budget for a complete off-grid system that can genuinely keep your food deeply cold for months during severe extended outages is somewhere comfortably between $300 and $450. That total sum is significantly less than the actual retail value of the food most standard families would completely lose and throw away in a single, unfortunate multi-day power outage. There is also a brilliant backup option hidden within the primary backup system that is highly worth mentioning. Most modern portable power stations have the built-in capability to charge directly from a standard 12-volt car accessory outlet. So, even if you do not have the financial budget for a solar panel quite yet, or if you happen to hit a long, miserable stretch of dark, cloudy weather that severely reduces your daily solar production, you can simply go outside, idle your car for roughly 30 minutes, seamlessly charge the portable power station directly from the vehicle's dashboard port, and easily harvest enough electrical juice to run the chest freezer for another 12 to 16 hours. In this specific scenario, your everyday commuter car literally becomes an ultra-quiet, highly efficient emergency generator. While it is certainly not ideal to use a vehicle as a permanent primary strategy, having it available as a reliable fallback option means you are never truly stuck or out of options. Here is exactly where it is deeply worth stepping back for a moment and putting all of this preparation into proper, historical context. Extended, multi-day power outages are absolutely not rare, isolated, or impossible events. In the year 2023 alone, the average American electricity customer experienced just over 5 hours of total power interruptions. And it is vital to remember, that is just the statistical average. In vast geographic regions consistently hit by severe, unpredictable weather, catastrophic ice storms, massive hurricanes, and sweeping, destructive wildfires, those outage numbers are dramatically, terrifyingly higher. During the devastating February 2021 Texas winter storm, literally millions of desperate people went completely without power for 4 to 7 consecutive days in freezing conditions. Some isolated neighborhoods went even longer without basic utilities. During the brutal aftermath of Hurricane Ian in Florida in 2022, some shattered coastal communities went 2 to 3 full weeks without a single drop of electricity. These terrifying events are absolutely not hypothetical, paranoid scenarios. They are recorded, recent history. And in every single one of these catastrophic weather events, the absolute first vital resource that local people lost was their perishable food. Massive regional grocery stores completely emptied their shelves within a matter of mere hours. Stressed, exhausted people were actively throwing away hundreds of dollars worth of rotting meat, spoiled dairy, and melted frozen goods into their yard waste bins because they had absolutely no reliable way to keep it cold. The strategic setup we are discussing here does not simply save your food during an unexpected outage. It profoundly saves you from the crushing psychological panic of having to desperately compete with everyone else in your town at the barren grocery store in the frantic middle of a crisis. You can simply lock your doors and stay home. You can continue to eat well. You can even generously share your surplus with your frightened neighbors. That is a fundamentally, radically different position of power and security to be in. Now, we must talk deeply about further optimizing this entire system, because there are several highly clever things you can easily do to squeeze even more incredible efficiency out of the hardware. First and foremost, physical location matters immensely. If your new chest freezer is sitting out in an uninsulated garage that routinely hits 100 degrees in the dead of summer, that compressor is going to have to work incredibly hard compared to a freezer sitting quietly in a heavily air-conditioned living room or a naturally cool subterranean basement. During totally normal, everyday operation, this environmental heat directly and negatively affects your monthly electricity bill. During an actual grid outage, that intense ambient heat directly and aggressively affects exactly how long your precious food stays safely frozen. If you have any choice whatsoever about the physical placement of the appliance, a cooler environment is universally much better. Second, you should strongly consider the incredible tactical advantage of converting your chest freezer to run actively as a highly efficient refrigerator. This concept sounds highly complicated and technical, but it is actually one of the absolute simplest, most effective hardware modifications you can possibly make. You simply purchase a small external temperature controller device. This is a compact digital device that easily plugs directly in between the wall electrical outlet and the freezer's power cord, and it features a long, thin temperature probe that you drop right inside the main chest compartment. You digitally set the desired internal temperature on the external screen, usually aiming for around 37 degrees if you want it to act as a refrigerator, and the intelligent controller physically forces the compressor to turn on and off only when needed to maintain that exact, specific temperature. Why does this specific modification matter so much? Because a thick-walled chest freezer running strictly as a 37-degree refrigerator uses an almost unbelievably tiny amount of electrical power, far less than it does when operating as a deep freezer. We are talking about a potential total daily energy consumption of an astonishingly low 0.3 to 0.5 kilowatt hours. At that incredibly low power sipping level, a very small portable solar panel and a basic battery station can easily keep that makeshift refrigerator running almost indefinitely with a massive, comforting margin of extra battery power to spare. The external digital temperature controller usually costs a mere $30 to $40 online. It has been a highly reliable, heavily tested workaround used by off-grid enthusiasts and home brewers for many years. You might reasonably be wondering exactly why you would want a highly efficient refrigerator instead of a deep freezer during an emergency. The honest answer is that in a perfect scenario, you might actually want both. Some dedicated individuals buy two separate, small chest freezers, leaving one running normally as a deep freezer and heavily modifying the second one to act as an ultra-efficient refrigerator. The total combined electrical power draw for both of these highly efficient units running simultaneously is incredibly still vastly less than the energy required to run a single, conventional, heavily glassed kitchen refrigerator-freezer combination unit. But even if your budget or space strictly dictates that you can only have one single unit, the mere option to quickly switch between deep freeze and refrigeration modes gives you immense tactical flexibility. In a short, unpredictable outage, you can simply keep it running as a standard freezer to strictly preserve all your frozen meats and long-term goods. In a much longer-term catastrophic grid-down situation, where you are actively processing newly acquired fresh food, bringing home hunted game, or actively trading agricultural goods with nearby neighbors, having an extremely low-power refrigerator becomes an incredibly useful, vital community asset. Third, you absolutely must purchase a simple, durable appliance thermometer. These basic analog devices cost a trivial $3 to $5, and they reliably give you the one crucial, undeniable piece of scientific information that actually matters during a long outage. Has unfortunately thawed but strictly remains constantly below 40 degrees. Fahrenheit is still completely safe to cook and consume. However, any perishable food that has been sitting in an environment above 40 degrees for more than 2 consecutive hours should be immediately discarded to prevent severe foodborne illness. Without a physical thermometer inside the chest, You are completely blindly guessing about the safety of your family's meals. With a cheap thermometer, you're making solid, medically informed decisions, and you are highly likely safely saving a massive amount of expensive food that you otherwise would have thrown away completely unnecessarily due to pure, unverified fear. Fourth, you must think incredibly strategically about what specific items you are actually choosing to store inside your newly secured environment. This is exactly where most well-intentioned people make their absolute first critical mistake when buying a deep chest freezer for emergency preparedness. They immediately rush to the store and carelessly fill the entire valuable space with absolutely nothing but frozen boxed pizzas, sugary popsicles, and heavily processed ice cream. And while those comfort items are perfectly fine for a normal, peaceful Tuesday evening, they are absolutely terrible, low-value investments for serious crisis preparedness. What you desperately want to pack into a prep-focused chest freezer is highly calorie-dense, nutritionally complete, robust food that physically stores incredibly well when frozen solid and can easily be prepared over a simple fire with minimal cooking equipment. Thick cuts of frozen meat are the absolute most obvious and valuable choice. Heavy packages of chicken thighs, large tubes of ground beef, and massive cuts of pork shoulder should be your priority. These specific meats are among the absolute most calorie-dense, heavily protein-rich foods you can possibly store in a confined space. If they are intelligently bought on sale or purchased heavily in bulk directly from a local butcher, the actual financial cost per calorie is remarkably low and highly efficient. A standard human family of 4 genuinely needs roughly 8,000 total calories per day just to stay properly fed, warm, and highly functional during a high-stress physical event. A few solid pounds of thawed meat, combined with some basic boiled rice and a few handfuls of frozen vegetables easily, cheaply, and safely, covers that entire massive daily caloric requirement. Frozen vegetables, especially large, mixed bulk bags of peas, carrots, and corn, are completely nutritionally comparable to buying fresh produce, and they are very often significantly cheaper. Heavy blocks of real butter and thick bricks of hard cheese freeze absolutely perfectly and provide the deep, heavy, necessary dietary fats and dense calories that your human body genuinely craves and physically needs to survive, especially during a highly physical, stressful, grid-down weather event. Even loaves of sliced bread and thick stacks of flour tortillas freeze absolutely perfectly and reliably provide incredibly quick, high-energy, no-cook carbohydrate meal options when you are too exhausted to build a fire. To maintain all of this properly, you must implement a strict, simple rotation strategy that guarantees everything stays incredibly fresh without requiring any complicated, heavily color-coded tracking system or complex spreadsheets. Simply use the chest freezer heavily and regularly as a totally normal part of your everyday routine family cooking. Whenever you buy new grocery items, intentionally pack them all the way down at the very bottom of the freezer compartment. Whenever you pull items out to cook for that night's dinner, always deliberately pull from the very top layer. This physical action means the absolute oldest food in the system is naturally always what gets eaten first, and absolutely nothing ever sits at the bottom long enough to develop thick, nasty layers of destructive freezer burn. You are not trying to curate and maintain a permanent, untouched museum of ancient frozen food. You are actively utilizing a working, dynamic, rolling pantry freezer that just so happens to always be packed full enough to completely protect your family during a sudden outage. There is one more absolutely vital, tiny detail on the physical food side. You must strictly label absolutely everything that goes into the cold. A cheap, sticky roll of paper masking tape and a dark, heavy permanent marker is absolutely all you need to achieve this. Write the exact contents of the package and the specific date it was placed inside. When absolutely everything is completely frozen, rock solid, and totally covered in thick, white, blinding frost, an expensive package of chicken thighs and a cheap bag of pork chops look exactly identical to the naked eye. Dedicating 10 seconds to labeling is one of those incredibly small, seemingly annoying habits that genuinely makes the entire emergency system actually function smoothly, instead of the freezer slowly degrading into a frustrating frozen mystery box that you dread opening. However, here is the deeper philosophical piece of preparedness that a lot of very focused people completely overlook when hyper-fixating on electrical gadgets. You absolutely must also establish a solid, massive baseline of purely shelf-stable food. Shelf-stable food is incredible because it requires absolutely no electricity, no batteries, no solar panels, and no refrigeration whatsoever to remain perfectly safe. Massive sealed buckets of dry white rice, heavy bags of dried pinto beans, rolled oats, stacked towers of canned goods, thick jars of peanut butter, and pure, crystallized honey. These ancient, reliable calories are your absolute safety net securely placed directly beneath your primary technological safety net. If the power grid is out long enough, or the skies are so dark that even your highly optimized chest freezer system eventually cannot keep up. And realistically, that would be a truly extreme, catastrophic month-long situation. You desperately need to know that you still have abundant food that requires absolutely nothing but a metal pot and some warm water to keep you alive. The absolute best, most reliable food security in the world comes from intelligently layering multiple, completely different strategies, absolutely never relying on one single, vulnerable point of failure. Your technologically supported frozen food is simply your highly comfortable first line of defense. Your heavy, dry, shelf-stable pantry is your rugged, deeply reliable second line. And if you genuinely want to go incredibly deep into total independence, mastering old-world skills like basic water bath canning, solar dehydrating, and safe vegetable fermenting ultimately become your permanent third line of defense. Absolutely none of these reliable methods require incredibly expensive equipment, highly specialized university knowledge, or immense wealth. They are simply old-fashioned, highly practical survival skills that our grandparents universally considered totally normal, everyday chores, and that our modern society has completely, collectively forgotten in the lazy, highly fragile age of convenient next-day grocery delivery apps. True, robust preparedness is never about having the absolute fanciest, most expensive tactical gear. It is strictly about building heavily overlapping, redundant systems so that no single mechanical breakdown or dead battery can ever leave your family hungry. Fifth, and this is a critical step that almost absolutely nobody ever talks about in the preparedness community. You must rigorously physically test your complete system long before you actually need to rely on it to survive. Pick a calm, sunny weekend when you are completely relaxed. Walk over and deliberately unplug your fully stocked chest freezer directly from the wall. Walk away and absolutely do not open the lid for a full 24 hours. After a full day has passed, quickly open it and deeply check the internal core temperature with your trusty analog thermometer. Exactly how warm did the ambient air inside actually get? Now, immediately plug your portable battery power station into the freezer and carefully time exactly how long it takes for the compressor to aggressively bring the internal temperature completely back down to a deep freeze. Take your small folding solar panel outside, set it up in the grass, plug it into the drained battery station, and accurately measure exactly how long the sun takes to fully recharge the lithium cells. You absolutely want to learn these highly specific, vital electrical numbers when things are perfectly calm, sunny, and incredibly low stakes, not when a massive, terrifying Category 5 storm is bearing down on your fragile roof and you are aggressively operating on high adrenaline, immense stress, and severely bad sleep. Running these practical physical tests also aggressively reveals hidden, highly dangerous system weaknesses. Maybe your freezer is not nearly as densely packed full of thermal mass as you mistakenly thought it was. Maybe your specific brand of portable power station actually does not handle the brief, violent compressor surge well and safely shuts itself off in an error mode. Maybe your chosen backyard solar panel position actually does not get nearly as much direct, unbroken sun throughout the afternoon as you initially assumed because of a tall neighbor's tree. It is infinitely better to shockingly discover absolutely all of this deeply frustrating information on a quiet, normal Saturday afternoon than during an actual, life-threatening, chaotic municipal emergency. Taking an afternoon of incredibly passive monitoring a couple of times a year guarantees that every single time you test it, you learn something incredibly small but highly valuable that makes the overall life-saving system just a little bit more robust and deeply reliable. Let me give you a highly detailed, extremely practical, step-by-step example of exactly how all of this deeply layered preparation beautifully comes together to protect you in a genuine crisis. Let us safely say there is a completely devastating, massive regional ice storm. The heavy ice strictly snaps thousands of pine trees, which tear down miles of heavy electrical transmission lines. The municipal power immediately goes totally out across your entire county. You listen to the emergency radio, and you have absolutely no idea when the overtaxed utility crews are actually coming back. Your totally unprepared neighbors are immediately in deep, terrifying financial and nutritional trouble. They have a massive, heavily glassed, upright kitchen freezer, completely full of expensive groceries, that unfortunately starts rapidly thawing within the very first 12 hours. By day 2 of the freezing, dark storm, they are incredibly frustrated and literally tossing incredibly expensive, warm steaks directly into the garbage trash bags. By day 3, they are desperately, dangerously driving their cars around slick, icy, hazardous roads, furiously looking for a rare, open gas station with emergency power or a single looted grocery store that happens to still be open to the public. You, heavily armed with this exact setup, are safely sitting in a completely, radically different psychological and physical situation. Your dedicated chest freezer, densely packed with high-quality frozen food and heavy, solid thermal water mass, barely even noticed the first 24 hours of the blackout. You calmly walked out to the garage and draped a couple of heavy, thick wool blankets directly over the plastic lid. By day 2, without any panic, you smoothly pull out your fully charged portable lithium power station. Plug the cold freezer straight into it, and simply let the quiet compressor hum and run for a few easy hours to firmly bring the internal temperature completely back down to a safe, deep freeze. You effortlessly set the small folding solar panel up in a sunny, south-facing window, or outside on the clear, icy porch to catch the afternoon rays. By day 4 of the devastating regional emergency, your valuable food is exactly as deeply frozen as it was the moment before the terrible outage even started. By day 7, the exact same victorious thing happens. By day 14 of living entirely off the broken grid, your food is incredibly still perfectly fine. You are calmly pulling out rich chicken thighs and crisp frozen vegetables, effortlessly making hot, heavily nutritious, real meals over a camp stove, while the utterly exhausted people 3 streets over are miserably eating the absolute last of their cold, salty, canned soup in total darkness. And here is a deeply important, highly philosophical point that genuinely matters immensely to building a better society. When your immediate neighbors are severely, physically struggling, you are suddenly in a highly privileged, deeply moral position to offer real help. You can generously share hot food. You can safely offer to securely store their highly vital, life-saving, expensive medical prescriptions that absolutely legally require strict refrigeration, like insulin. You can easily become a quiet, sturdy pillar of local resourcefulness, instead of just being another frantic, terrified person, aggressively competing for incredibly scarce municipal supplies at the empty grocery store. That mindset is completely not paranoid, isolated, survivalist thinking. That is deeply rooted, historical community thinking. And that beautiful level of neighborhood charity strictly starts with having your own personal, basic physical needs securely covered first. That entire scenario is absolutely not a prepper fantasy. That is strictly applied thermodynamics and basic physics, wrapped elegantly in a highly accessible $300 financial investment. Furthermore, there is a massive, undeniable psychological component to this entire concept that is profoundly worth mentioning. When the power violently goes out, and you deeply, fundamentally know in your core that your family's vital food supply is completely safe and physically secure, you absolutely do not panic. You do not make wild, desperate, highly dangerous runs to crowded, angry retail stores. You absolutely do not needlessly deplete your highly valuable, finite emergency physical cash, buying massively overpriced, low-quality survival supplies from whoever happens to be maliciously price gouging that week. You simply stay safely at home, stay completely calm, and quietly focus your massive mental energy on whatever else genuinely needs your immediate attention. Maybe that focused attention means strictly keeping your frightened family warm and comfortable, kindly helping an injured neighbor clear a fallen tree branch, or simply sitting quietly in a chair and peacefully reading a good book illuminated by soft candlelight. The incredible, heavy mental clarity that reliably comes from firmly knowing the absolute base layer of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is totally handled, is in all practical experience, genuinely worth far more than the actual retail price of the food itself. You emphatically do not need an underground concrete bunker to feel deeply secure in this chaotic world. You literally just need a solid, logical plan and a few $100s worth of highly practical, common-sense electrical equipment. Now, it is deeply vital to directly address a few highly common, repeated objections, because these exact skeptical concerns inevitably come up absolutely every single time this highly alternative approach to emergency power is discussed. The absolute first, most common objection is the firm statement that a person simply does not have the physical floor room inside their house for a bulky chest freezer. This is an entirely fair, completely understandable physical concern, especially for those living in an incredibly tight, modern urban apartment. But you must measure the reality. A standard 5 cubic foot chest freezer is generally about 25 inches wide, roughly 22 inches deep, and exactly 33 inches tall. That extremely tiny, compact physical footprint is roughly the exact same size as a very small bedroom nightstand or a tiny hallway table. Highly creative people regularly put these small units tucked away deep in bedroom closets, slid into tight hallway nooks, and incredibly, some even drape a nice piece of heavy cloth over them and use them effectively as functional living room side tables with a solid piece of thick plywood laid carefully on top for a lamp. If you genuinely have enough floor room for a single small piece of decorative furniture, you absolutely have enough floor room for a highly life-saving chest freezer. The second major objection, often loudly voiced, is the financial reality that a person simply cannot comfortably afford to spend $300 right now. This is also completely fair and deeply understood, especially in tough economic times. But absolutely nobody is demanding that this is a system where you must buy absolutely everything all at once on the very first day. You simply start with just the chest freezer. That insulated box is the absolute foundation of the entire pyramid, and honestly, it easily financially pays for itself in massively reduced daily food waste within just a few short months, even during totally normal, completely peaceful everyday operation. Then, simply add the empty recycled water jugs to build up your thermal mass. That vital step is entirely free. Just use the deeply packed freezer completely normally for 6 consecutive months. Then, only when you can genuinely safely afford it without financial stress, you patiently add the portable lithium power station. When you can comfortably afford the final step, you proudly add the folding solar panel. Each newly added technological piece powerfully makes the entire system vastly more capable, but even having the very first initial piece alone dramatically and immediately improves your physical security position against disaster. The third major objection, and this is the one deeply rooted in decades of heavy industrial marketing, is the stubborn, prideful statement that a person will simply just go buy a massive, loud, gasoline-powered generator. And traditional heavy generators are genuinely great machines for very specific industrial tasks. They have a place in the world, but a conventional gas generator fundamentally requires a constant, heavy flow of explosive liquid fuel. And combustible fuel is exactly the absolutely first thing that completely geographically disappears in a severe, sweeping regional emergency. Gas stations absolutely require municipal electrical power to pump the deep underground gas up to the surface. Local supply chains get instantly, violently disrupted by blocked roads. During the horrific Texas freeze, desperate people were miserably waiting outside in absolutely freezing miles-long lines for many consecutive hours just hoping to fill a tiny 5-gallon plastic can to keep their families from freezing, and many massive stations ran completely dry entirely. Furthermore, a heavy gas generator absolutely legally and physically requires massive outdoor air ventilation, which strictly means you absolutely cannot safely run it indoors, inside a closed garage, or near an open window. Silent carbon monoxide poisoning severely emitted from improperly placed generators tragically and senselessly kills dozens of completely innocent Americans absolutely every single year during major electrical outages. It is a very real, incredibly serious, entirely avoidable deadly risk. A heavy generator is also incredibly loud, aggressively announcing to the entire dark, hungry, desperate neighborhood exactly who has the loud power and the expensive food, when absolutely nobody else does. Lastly, a gas engine requires constant, annoying mechanical maintenance. It demands frequent oil changes, chemical fuel stabilizer to prevent rot, and requires aggressively running it periodically every single month just to keep the tiny mechanical carburetor from completely gumming up and destroying itself. Conversely, a heavily insulated chest freezer tightly packed with dense thermal water mass paired elegantly with a tiny, modern solar power station, is completely, beautifully silent. It requires absolutely zero explosive liquid fuel, happily works perfectly safely indoors inside a living room, and practically needs absolutely zero mechanical maintenance throughout the entire year. The quiet power station simply charges itself directly from the silent sun. The cold freezer simply does its incredibly quiet, highly efficient freezing thing. That logical reality absolutely does not rigidly mean a heavy gas generator has absolutely zero place in your overarching emergency planning. If you genuinely want a massive, loud generator strictly to run heavy construction power tools, power all your overhead house lights, or run other heavy, luxurious appliances, you absolutely should pursue one. But specifically relying on it as the absolute sole, fragile answer to simply keeping a small box of food cold during massive, unpredictable, multi-week outages, it has deeply significant, highly dangerous logistical limitations that this much simpler, profoundly elegant solar approach completely avoids entirely. And the absolute most beautiful thing is these two completely different approaches are absolutely not mutually exclusive. If you are fortunate enough to have both systems, your massive gas generator simply becomes a heavy backup to your quiet, highly efficient solar backup. That incredible redundancy is precisely what creates thick, unbreakable layers of total resilience. Every single time a massive, destructive regional power outage heavily hits a major city, the exact same tragic, totally avoidable stories loudly show up on the evening television news. Heartbroken families miserably losing many hundreds of hard-earned dollars in ruined, spoiled food. Exhausted, terrified people miserably waiting in endless, angry lines for hours at completely overwhelmed, heavily rationed grocery stores. Vulnerable elderly folks dangerously going completely without proper daily nutrition, simply because they safely cannot drive their cars to a distant open store, and absolutely everything inside their warm kitchen refrigerator is completely spoiled and highly toxic. Absolutely none of that miserable, chaotic suffering has to be your personal family story. For roughly the absolute same financial cost of a single, highly overpriced nice dinner out at a fancy restaurant, you can permanently and confidently set up a brilliant, quiet, highly efficient thermodynamic system that completely and silently protects your family's vital food supply safely through absolutely almost any catastrophic power outage you are ever realistically likely to face in your entire lifetime. It is absolutely not overly complicated. It is profoundly, not heavily expensive. And it genuinely does not require any highly special mechanical skills or deeply advanced technological knowledge beyond the simple, basic laws of physics we have thoroughly explored. Start with absolutely one incredibly simple, tiny step. Buy the highly efficient chest freezer, deliberately fill the empty bottom space with cheap plastic water jugs, and simply buy some heavy, nutritious chicken thighs the very next time they are heavily on sale. You are actively building an unbreakable foundation of immense household resilience.